everybody. This is Don Gulling, CEO of Verteks Consulting. I'm also joined by our outreach coordinator, Brittany DeFilly, and by our guest speaker today, Dan Chacon, as well as Amanda from Datto. Looking forward to presenting an hour of content to you on Datto solutions and how you can make sure you're getting the full benefit of the technology that you own. And then for several of you that don't yet have a Datto, you have an opportunity to see a little bit more behind the scenes of how you can make sure your data is protected on-site, in the cloud, servers can be spun up on demand, and all the intricacies of the solution so that you can evaluate it for potentially protecting your company's data. In a way of introduction, I'd like to introduce you to Dan Chacon, who is our guest speaker who's also a long-term engineer with Datto. Dan and I go way back. He is an expert on Datto solutions. He's also a guru on business continuity and disaster recovery in general. And Dan is going to do a great job of presenting these solutions and how they can help you. We're going to focus on the special capabilities of Datto SIRIS specifically, including the fact that it's better protection from an encryption attack than anything else out there in lots of ways. It has immutable storage, and we're going to go into that a bit. It also has the ability to depending on how you set it up and configured it, to virtualize servers on site to give you sort of high availability in case of a SAN or server outage. And then of course, business continuity in case of a major situation, hurricane, whatever it may be. We can virtualize your servers in the cloud rapidly, get you back online. And then lastly, just day-to-day backup, which is still a thing. And we got a call this morning from a customer who luckily has a Datto, and they needed some emails recovered from 2019, and no problem, we can get that for you. So all those capabilities are there. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Dan. Dan Chacon, you have the floor.
Thank you, Don, and always a pleasure to present on the behalf of Verteks. We'll start with a bit of background in myself. I've been with Datto for just about 10 years. If we count back to my first week, it's actually Superstorm Sandy here on the East Coast. I'll use that as a nice anecdote. I started working for a disaster recovery company during a disaster about 10 years ago. Prior to working here, I do have an additional 12 years of IT experience, and I've worked in almost every single facet of IT. But prior to working here, I stayed away from backup technology. Got to be very candid, I do not like backup technology. I never really did. We tend to find ourselves in very high panic and stress-induced scenarios, especially because things tend to break when we're in the middle of recovery. And when I first started working with the Cirrus platform, I began to quickly understand that this is so much different than a traditional backup solution. And come to find out, if you're only doing a backup today of your data or your mission critical systems, that's just about a third of what we should be doing in terms of being able to eliminate downtime. And that's really going to be the focus of today's presentation: how to time effectively get back up and running should something horrible happen to either internal systems or your site overall. Cirrus, as it's known, is a palindrome. It's spelled the same way forwards and backwards. Just a little bit of history in the naming convention. It sounds like the type of cloud, but it's spelled this way. Datto is just ditto the data for those of you that haven't heard of our organization. We've been in our space now for about 11 years. And I have the pleasure of presenting this solution on behalf of the MSP partners that we work with for a decade. And it's very cool to educate people on what the solution is capable of doing. This slide, there's a lot happening here. I know there's a lot to consider on here, but it's relatively simple. We have our on-premise solution. Cirrus is a hardware appliance. It's Linux-based, and it leverages ZFS under the hood. We'll talk about that as we proceed. We developed our own technology to store that backup data here on the appliance. And when we talk about cloud infrastructure, this data doesn't go to AWS. It doesn't go to Microsoft. We have our own private cloud infrastructure in Pennsylvania and in Utah. So the data comes from your physical or virtual systems over your network into Cirrus and then replicates out to our cloud. And whether it be a failure internal, where we can run off of the appliance or do file restores, we'll review all of that good stuff from here. We can do a lot from Cirrus itself, or if we had to do recovery in the data center, these are all actions that Verteks can take without even getting Datto support involved. We offer a lot in the way of self-service to our partners, but of course, should they need to get our support involved at that point, our support's 24/7. We have to be. We're a disaster recovery company. And again, I'll reference my first week here when we were only 150 kids running around with like chickens with our heads cut off back then. Datto is now a publicly traded organization. We're about 2,200 employees worldwide. And our cloud infrastructure spans the globe. We don't have data centers in just Pennsylvania and Utah. For our international partners, we have data centers all over the world today. So whether it be internal failure, we'll talk about how the technology that we developed allows us to actually run your systems off of this appliance. Say your physical or virtual system died internally due to hardware failure, software failure, what have you, Cirrus becomes your server. You can run here for a period of time, and then we can virtualize back and recover back to any physical or virtual system that you may be running internally with minimal downtime. Should it be that larger disaster scenario, getting up and running in our data center is really not a tremendous ask. These are things that are usually accomplished within 24 hours of your disaster. So say that again. Should you experience some sort of major outage at your location where you simply cannot access your building, you will have your infrastructure up and running in our cloud in less than 24 hours. And of course, Don has been through this scenario, I'm sure many of time with his clients that currently use our solution. It will tend to speak for itself in terms of being able to accomplish what we're touting here. On the first slide that I had shown off, we were talking about immutable storage, which we're going to reference here as we get a bit deeper into our presentation. But this next screen is an example of the Datto Partner Portal. This is where Verteks can literally see every single Cirrus deployment that they have within their fleet under BCDR status. That's an acronym that I want everyone to get really familiar with. That's Business Continuity Disaster Recovery Status. This is not just a backup system. To call it a backup system is really doing it a discredit. Backup is, again, about a third of what it is accomplishing. From here, not only can we remotely monitor what's happening with the appliance that it's checking in, it's supposed to call home every 10 minutes just to say it's online, how much storage it's consuming, we get a real sense of what's happening within the network being protected by the Cirrus. Incredibly important. When backups complete with traditional backup software, we tend to find out that they finished, and that's it. And that doesn't tell us much about recoverability. Therefore, backup testing becomes very incredibly important for verification of data. And we tend to find out that things are broken during recovery at the worst possible time. Cirrus allows us to take a much more proactive approach to troubleshooting backups. We'll talk about this proprietary storage methodology, everything that's happening when backups complete, including one of my favorite features called screenshot verification, where we actually instantly boot each system on your network. So we take a backup, start a copy of each production machine here, make sure we're looking at a login screen, ship off those results here and via email, just to make sure that you can fail over successfully. We'll talk much more about that concept as we proceed. From here, accessing the device interface. I want you to picture that Cirrus only has power and internet plugged into it. There's really no need to connect a monitor, keyboard, or mouse into that physical hardware on your network. And from anywhere in the world, we can click Device Web, and this will bring us remotely to the web interface that we use to control the Cirrus platform. In the way of setup and deployment and getting this going, it really doesn't take much to get this set up and to begin protecting your network. There's usually a very lightweight piece of software that we have to deploy within the systems that we're looking to protect. Datto's agent software, I refer to as lightweight given the nature in which it grabs data from your systems. Traditional backup software can really impact the performance of servers significantly. That's because traditional software needs to traverse the entire hard drive looking for changes that have occurred. So for anyone that's ever run a backup and your server slowed down to a crawl and you started backing up once per day as a result of that, yeah, that's yesterday's backup. That's our grandfather's technology. Today, modern backup technology works at a block level. So the first backup that we take is everything. That's every bit of data on any volume selected for protection. The C drive, the D drive, the E drive, so on and so forth. And the subsequent backups are relatively small. They're based on the blocks that are changing on the drive. We are also an application-aware backup engine for those of you that happen to be running Exchange internal or SQL databases. We have no problem protecting those throughout the course of the day. The significant difference is we don't go through the entire hard drive looking for changes that have occurred. We actively track them, and we get to set this very nice expectation that backups can occur every hour on the hour at an absolute minimum. That is our minimum recommendation, hourly protection, with options that drop all the way down to every 5 minutes. So we can protect your servers every half hour, every 15 minutes, 10, all the way down to a 5-minute interval with the solution, with hardly any impact in performance. I wouldn't be doing my job if we didn't begin talking about security of the solution overall. First, let's head back here for a moment. This portal has multi-factor authentication for all of Don's employees, anyone working with him. But the solution can also be set up in a co-managed environment where perhaps you have someone technical within your organization that wants to access the device interface and monitor the solution. They would have multi-factor authentication to get here as well. No one gets in here without authenticating themselves. Secondly, any action taken by anyone is logged. There's no secrets about what happens here in our portal. And this is the primary means of accessing that device interface. Originally, when the solution was first developed, you could actually just target its IP address in a web browser. I'll do that here. You can't do this anymore. We've disabled this by default. I've enabled mine to show off another security feature. If I were to log into the system local by targeting its IP, if I head to the Protect tab, you'll note the flag here says that only people that access the system through the partner portal can remove data. It's a nice security feature. If someone had hacked the account and got into the local device UI, which is disabled by default, there's no way for them to remove data. Now, let's say someone had maliciously accessed the device UI through the partner portal. They came in here and they started removing agent data. They deleted the data locally and replicated it in the cloud. And where it says this process is irreversible with that exclamation point, that's a bit of a fib. It's a bit of a lie. We can actually undelete the data. We'll start talking about our immutable cloud storage. There's a couple of buzzwords in the industry right now. And when it comes to traditional backup solutions, everyone's talking about air gapping, air gapping, air gapping. What does air gapping mean? It means that we've given up. We've let the hackers win, and we're taking our backup storage completely offline as a means of avoiding it being corrupted by ransomware. That's traditional backup storage. We'll talk about how traditional backup storage is very unintelligent. It's just a repository for data. It's just a network attached storage. It's just disk. And one of the cool things about this system, this is a Linux Ubuntu-based system that leverages a very special file system under the hood. And we've also introduced a feature here called Cloud Deletion Defense, which is the first thing that I'll note today. If someone had taken a malicious action and removed data, we can actually undelete it. It's kind of like a recycle bin feature for our cloud. The system being Linux-based, not just Cirrus, but our cloud infrastructure as well, helps us in terms of ransomware. It's certainly not the end-all be-all, but it's worth noting that the majority of ransomware is simply written for Windows. They hold a larger market share. Now, the next bit of information here in this paragraph is absolutely incredible, and I just love telling people this. This file system consistently checks and fixes itself, and everything that it does under the hood means that I get to tell you that you never have to worry about Cirrus or Datto's cloud infrastructure becoming encrypted with ransomware. I know that's an incredibly bold statement to make. Please do not take my word for this. Do your own research and Google this file system. But you literally never have to worry about this system becoming impacted by ransomware. We'll talk about what happens if your server gets hit and how we identify that and how we can recover within a matter of really minutes of that happening. But you simply do not need to worry about the system becoming impacted. There are many other benefits of the file system that we're going to reference as we get a bit deeper, including our snapshotting and cloning capability. But we'll head back to the UI here just to note a little bit more about security. As systems are added in for protection, after our software has been deployed, we can literally encrypt each one with a passphrase that Datto does not manage. This would be managed between Verteks and yourselves. That passphrase would be required to do any type of recovery, and when we apply this layer of encryption, that's actually a military grade level encryption per server being added into the interface here. It's AES 256-bit encryption as our standard. Next, we'll begin to discuss the method by which we store this data within our solution. Traditional backup storage is really fundamentally flawed for a number of different reasons. First, when you're imaging, image versus file and folder, very significant. We have file and folder level backup, which just lets us select files and folders within volumes we're protecting. That's not what's happening here. Image-based means that we take an exact copy of all of the data on the C drive, D drive, E drive, whatever selected for protection. Now, traditionally, backup technology would take that full backup and perhaps, well, there's two different ways of doing this. You could take a full image every evening of each server that you have, but that's a tremendous amount of data, likely. So your investment in local storage would be significant, and getting full backups from one location to another can be a tremendous forklift of your upload bandwidth. It could put a tremendous strain on your network, even if you're trying to do it nightly. It may be almost impossible to replicate the images. So a lot of times people take a full image followed by very small files called incrementals. The problem with incremental backups is that they actually rely on one another. You can imagine creating this chain dependency. And in that dependency, in the midst of recovery, let's say a server went down and we try to restore your system from the backup. If one of those little incremental files is lost or corrupted along the way, there is literally no way to recover your system beyond that point in time. And unfortunately, we as IT professionals tend to find out about this in the middle of restore. At the absolute worst possible time, when your server's down or when your site is completely destroyed, that's when we find out that we cannot recover your systems either to the latest points in time or literally at all. Therefore, backup testing becomes absolutely paramount. And to what degree do we test our backups today? Every time I ask anyone this question, it's never as often as they should be doing. And perhaps it's just a file restore. Maybe we do it once per year, or more often than not, believe it or not, I hear we don't do it at all. And really, your backups are only as good as your testing and verification process. So we're going to discuss how our backup technology is different, how we store our data, and what it allows us to do. The technology is called inverse chain technology, and it is a much different way of storing this data. We leverage our file system to take snapshots of a virtual copy of your production disk. So we have some pretty cool features here in ZFS, like cloning and snapshotting capability. And first, you can picture that on each server that we're protecting, we make an exact copy of each volume. Step 2, that volume is stripped of its hardware identity. So we don't really care if you're using VMware, Hyper-V, physical servers like Dell or HP, what have you. Each volume is then converted into a virtual disk, brought into this Linux Ubuntu-based system, leveraging this very powerful file system. And then we start taking snapshots of a virtual copy of your disk. What does that mean? It means that I'm capturing the smallest amount of data possible. My backups are completely independent of one another, and they're instantly bootable should failure arise. And I'll be very candid with everyone. We used to use an incremental chain in our solution before I started working here, thankfully. And if your server went down with just 200 gig of data, relatively small amount of data for a server, that would take about 24 hours for us to start a copy of your production machine and get you back up and running, which is very embarrassing because you can restore 200 gig of data in well under 24 hours. So virtualization was useless in this platform once upon a time. When we built Cirrus and we started leveraging this file system, that operation went from 200 gigs for 24 hours to 6 seconds flat for any size system, despite the number of backups and moving backwards in time. We'll also reference this cloning capability here in a moment when we do some restores. Backups tend to break while we use them because, believe it or not, the majority of backup software in the world will do recovery from the live backup image itself, which is incredibly dangerous. If you touch that image, you run the risk of corrupting and not being able to restore. We never touch the image. We make a clone of your data set. Make a clone, and we can make clones incredibly fast, considering that the zettabyte file system, that's what the Z stands for, zettabyte, was built to work with incredible amounts of data. As a matter of fact, there's only about 8 or 9 zettabytes of data in the world today. 1 zettabyte is enough storage to hold 30 billion 4K movies. If anyone wants to nerd out and really do some deep diving into this file system underneath the hood of Cirrus and our cloud infrastructure. The point that I had made earlier about the storage being immutable, you have absolutely got to consider where your backups live today. These hackers are not stupid, and they are writing out their viruses and zero-day threats to attack backup storage, not just your servers. They're writing their viruses to attack traditional dummy backup storage. Why do I call it dumb? Because ours is incredibly intelligent. Why should you be concerned about your backups becoming encrypted? Because, well, these guys are going to get paid if your backups are encrypted. What are you meant to recover from if that were the case? A moment ago, I mentioned that we can virtualize any size server in just about 6 seconds flat. And I can't wait to show that off for you live here in a moment, and I will. But before we get there, I want to talk to you about my favorite thing about our solution. It's a concept of proactive troubleshooting. And I wrote a blog about this concept. Don, I believe your constituent there is going to share both of these blogs in the chat window.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this one, I simply love the title of Why Managed Service Providers like Verteks Should Take a Proactive Approach to Troubleshooting Backups. And I think the very simple answer to that is because you can. That's why. You've never been able to take a proactive approach to troubleshooting a backup before. Is backup troubleshooting not always incredibly reactive to the failure during recovery or the test that I'm doing? With the technology that we developed, the first thing that we built here is a process called screenshot verification, but there are 7 additional layers of automated verification, which allow me to get in here and fix things in a proactive fashion. I want you to picture that every day of the week, we simply start from backup, each production machine verifying that it had booted successfully. A picture is taken when the systems are done booting. The results of this test are also emailed to whomever is specified and then remotely reported back here to our portal, ensuring that if you need to fail over, I'll have no problem starting the operating system, which is great. We get some peace of mind. That's not why this is cool. The main reason why this is so incredibly powerful is because it proactively recognizes when an operating system cannot start. So imagine that we're monitoring the solution and we see here in bright red that this operating system failed to start. It was a blue screen of death, a startup repair screen, some sort of a booting error. And Cirrus is literally yelling at us saying, hey, if you need to fail over, you're not going to be able to. We can now take a proactive approach to troubleshooting, figure out what the heck had happened with either the server, our software, the Cirrus itself, fix the issue, take the next backup manually, and then request that this point in time be booted into that verification process. We can also boot any point in time through the restore tab and do things a bit more manually, but we can verify that the subsequent images are now bootable. Unlike traditional backup software, where we have chain dependency, meaning that if we were to remove anything from here, that would be the last backup we can restore to, and these would be useless. We don't have that limitation here in our solution. Not that we have to do this, but we can. I can delete any incremental backup that we've taken without breaking the chain. There simply is no chain of backups in our system. We can restore above, in between, below, points of deletion without an issue, and we haven't rendered our data useless. We don't have to start over from scratch. Now, granted, while the process is cool, if we were only verifying whether or not Windows had started, that really doesn't tell us much about running a server and its applications. We understand that. That's why we developed additional layers of automated verification. When screenshots complete and done testing that Windows had started successfully, let's say that server we're hosting SQL, DHCP, Active Directory, or DNS, very common Microsoft applications which live on networks today. All we have to do is toggle those switches on to ensure that each service associated with those applications had started correctly. There's a number of arbitrary services associated with these Microsoft applications, so we wrote the scripts for you here. Directly below that, this list is not arbitrary. This is a list of services pulled from your production server and dropped in here. We can then verify any other essential service based on your mission critical applications, not just these traditional Microsoft ones, that these had started correctly. For the more technical people that have joined us today, we can also upload a PowerShell script, and that can verify that SQL has the right number of tables, that you can reach a particular web application. There's really no limit to what we can use PowerShell scripting for. And remember what I had mentioned a moment ago, that these backups tend to run hourly throughout the course of a business day whenever data is changing on the system. This is not our grandfather's once per day backup solution. No, we look for consistent protection, ensuring that we're not going to lose much data in the event that something goes wrong. When every single backup completes, we do a file system integrity check on the C drive, a check to make sure the presence of each volume selected for protection is actually present within the backup, that we can see our data volumes, that the services associated with consistent protection are healthy. And then last but not least, a ransomware detection feature, which is just absolutely incredible. Let's say one of your systems fell subject to ransomware. It's completely encrypted, and we've taken a backup of that encrypted system. The tests that we develop pick up on the signs of early infection. What happens to a computer when it's encrypted with ransomware? Well, for those of us that have seen this live, I hope you haven't. All of the extensions will change. So what looks like a .pdf or PNG here, all of the extensions within the file system change to this large and very arbitrary string of characters. And even if we change it back to a PDF, we're still in a lot of trouble. Our data is encrypted and it's being held for ransom. We pick up on that. We generate an email that says, hey, the backup of that system that I just took is encrypted. Hopefully we can get that offline before it spreads all over the network. As impressively and importantly, any backup suspected of having ransomware will be marked as such within the interface here as we do recovery, and we'll do some restores here in a moment. But you can imagine as we go to boot a system, it would say, hey, ransomware suspected in bright red letters. Let's move backwards in time before we're encrypted. We'll talk about how to get up and running within that scenario within a matter of minutes of it happening. At this point, if everyone would please combine these 8 features together into what we call advanced backup verification. And in my professional experience, I've never seen a solution that provides as much information as Cirrus does when backup's complete and with the screenshot verification process. I've also never seen a solution that allows us to take a proactive approach to troubleshooting and fix things well before you ever need to restore. And therefore, I get to hear consistently that this thing just works when I need it to work, and I love saying that about our solution. It is not a set it and forget it type of appliance. I've heard some of the less tenured salespeople here at Datto say something to that degree. Oh, it's a set it and forget it appliance. Oh, no, it's not. This is not rotisserie chicken. I promise you, if you ignore what it's telling you, we would be in a lot of trouble. But with a partner like Verteks and a team that monitors the solution for you, they're paying attention here. If anything in local verification had failed, we'd see half orange, half green moons prompting some action. And of course, that verification process and screenshotting are incredibly important as well. There's one other note that I'll make here before we start doing some restores. While all of this verification is happening on the appliance, it applies to our cloud data. This is a very turnkey solution. You have Datto's hardware, you got our software, you have our cloud infrastructure sitting behind it. That's not always the case with competitive solutions. Sometimes you get somebody's software sitting on somebody else's hardware going to somebody else's cloud. And we can run into scenarios where A, we're paying different people, but B, more importantly, where vendors are pointing fingers at one another in terms of why things aren't working at the worst possible times. And again, granted, the verification is happening on the appliance. However, it does apply. Of course, it applies to our cloud infrastructure data. We'll talk about offsite replication here in a second. But imagine all of the testing that we do with the solution. Yeah, it's not really about verification anymore. It's about documenting process. It's about making sure that we understand what to do and how long it would take should we need to recover or virtualize or fail over, whether it be here locally or in Datto Cloud. I love showing off this capability. We've been working on the interface of the device that would potentially be within your infrastructure. Well, of course, we have data in Datto Cloud. The device only holds about 3 months worth of recovery points. The cloud is built to hold either a year's worth of your data or to hold that indefinitely. And as a vendor here in our space, I love talking about our cloud storage in that we don't charge for cloud storage. Well, let me rephrase that. We have a plan where you can buy cloud storage for Cirrus. No one buys that. If you were to exceed the allocated storage, you'd have to pay more money per month. It's a variable cost. A very long time ago, about 5-6 years ago, we began this concept of time-based retention for our cloud, which says, here's the size appliance you need. That's going to hold 3 months, and then you either get a year's worth of data, or we simply hold that data forever in Datto Cloud at a fixed rate per month. No surprises in your bill in terms of cloud storage. And if I need to do a file restore from 6 months ago, 6 years ago, here's where we would come. We'll also start some systems in our data center a little bit later on. Don, I wanted to pause for a moment because I've been talking for about a half an hour and just open up for any of your feedback and what we covered so far in this advanced verification. This is my favorite thing about the solution.
Yeah, thanks for that, and great info, Dan. Much appreciated. Just to reiterate, obviously you touched on all the most important things, but I think the one thing you maybe don't know, and I want to reassure our clients of, is that we have a full-time effort on maintaining proactive care of your backups. And so what that means is every morning, our service desk team uses a tool, a reporting tool, to look at every backup job from every server that's on a Datto to determine if it succeeded or failed and if there are remedial actions that need to be taken. And so we look at it every single day, and that's part of the service that we offer. So in addition to you having the ability to do what you need to do, of course, we want you to know that really it's backup as a service and DR as a service, and we're playing a role in looking at it every single day. Another key point, I mean, he went into the details about ZFS. I did want to point out that really is the best possible protection from ransomware in all kinds of ways. So keep that in mind. And then lastly, I would say that his point about this being a unified solution with the hardware, software, and cloud all from the same company really can't be overstated. And Dan is totally right about that. The primary reason we switched to Datto, we use Datto ourselves. We have it internally. That's what we rely on for our DR, backup, and business continuity solution. And the reason is prior to that, in the bad old days, we had software from company A, hardware from company B, cloud from company C, and it's a lot of babysitting. And Dan is right. It is a lot of finger pointing when something doesn't work. Is it a software issue? Is it a snapshot issue? Is it the hardware? Is it the cloud? And Datto has really simplified that and made it reliable. So our number one criteria for any backup, disaster recovery, or continuity solution is it going to work when you need it? And
Right.
I've been doing this 26 years, and I've tried everything under the sun, and they've all let me down, but Datto has not. And so that's why we use it, and that's why we vouch for it, and that's why we recommend it.
And what a different approach that we get to take, right, with this proactive stance and monitoring what the system is telling us rather than having to literally go in and recover for testing purposes every single system that we're protecting across our entire client base. And this is why people literally don't do it as often as they should or at all. And then come to find out when situations rear their ugly head and we need to recover, we really go into scenarios with our fingers crossed. We hope. And we cannot do that with mission critical data. That is yesterday's technology. Next, we'll get into some of the restore processes, and I get to start bragging about the speed and ease of use of how simplistic it is to go in here and recover a file should it be deleted. This is probably the most common type of restore that we have to do with the solution. More often than not, someone had deleted something accidentally, maliciously, and we simply need to recover it from one of the images on the appliance or in Datto Cloud. Now, mind you, the backups are relatively small. If we were to head back to our Protect tab and take a peek at the size of the backups, and especially in my demo environment, we're talking about megabytes worth of information, very small. We're going to take megabytes worth of information, combine them with our base image, not touch the base image, make a clone of it. And this is how fast that operation happens. So granted, this is just a C drive. It's about 40 or 50 gigs of data, but I promise you, it doesn't matter how big the server is. This is what we can expect in terms of mounting an image for recovery. Please do not blink because that process is complete. And there is the entire protected volume. Mind you, this is a web page that I've accessed remotely, and I'm working from home and on a system that's located in a remote location. You can expect this type of performance. We now have the ability to search or browse through our file system. And once we locate our lost data, it's a click and a download away. I built this picture a long time ago to help people understand our solution. And I literally just recovered that from one of the backups. If we only have traditional backup alone, it's relatively inexpensive, but you're limited to backup and restore only. What does that mean? Well, it means the more data you have, the longer time it's going to take to return you to production. And heaven forbid it's a hardware failure. We're going to have to send someone on site, assess damage, order parts, wait for that to come in, and then start a restore process, which can literally take hours or days or weeks worth of time if we're talking about terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of information. It's typically multi-vendor, right? We have somebody's software on somebody's hardware going to somebody else's cloud. There's a high rate of downtime, but also a high rate of failure during recovery, as we've been discussing all these fundamental flaws with traditional backup technology, and we have to manually test everything. To the far right, there's a concept called high availability, which was built to avoid downtime and hardware failure. You could have redundant hardware systems that are built to fail over to one another. It's incredibly expensive. If you want to match the power of Datto Cloud, you would literally need rental space in 2 different co-locations with redundant infrastructure there as well. And now you're talking likely 6 figures worth of investment. And believe it or not, while it's okay for hardware redundancy and failover, it does nothing to protect you against ransomware. So you still need to make an investment in backup software after the 6 figures you've just dropped in hardware and infrastructure. This is, again, typically multi-vendored. And while it's redundant if major outages occur, you still need backup and testing of all of that, which is why our solution is so incredibly complete. You're talking about one piece of hardware to accomplish what only enterprise-grade level businesses could ever afford to do. That's business continuity with the Datto solution. So while this operation is fast and easy enough, again, for the more technical crew out there, we've had to make some adjustments. We've had to make some development changes. Rather than just being able to recover data through this web interface, if I need data with NTFS permissions intact, we can mount the protected volumes, the backed up volumes of a server via iSCSI back to that target machine. They would show up as logical disks, and then we can use robocopy to copy data from point A to point B. If anyone on the call is a bit more technical and you wanted to have a one-on-one presentation walk through that more technical stuff, we can certainly accommodate you there. Before we get into the failover scenarios, the failover to the appliance and the disaster recovery component, I do have some really cool additional things to speak to here, some little known features underneath the hood of our system. Sometimes locating lost data when we have no idea when it were removed from an image is incredibly difficult. So see, I don't have a way of searching across all of my backups. I would have to mount search. That is an incredible waste of time. And when we realized how much of a waste of time that was and how much time our partners were wasting, we built this utility called Backup Insights. Insights is absolutely incredible. It leverages ZFS to assess changes that have occurred between any 2 images in a relatively short amount of time. So let's say I knew I had my data between March 6th and today. We can start this comparison. ZFS is going to go to work mounting the images and then calculating the differences between them. In a moment when this finishes, it will show us anything that were modified, deleted, or added between those 2 recovery points. And we can start using this for really all sorts of different use cases. While it's calculating these differences, I love noting that we've developed our own rollback utility. Traditional backup software and its restore process tends to format the target. That means it deletes everything and then copies all of the data from the backup, which is what causes all of the downtime. Our rollback utility does not work in this fashion. Like Insights, it can assess hundreds, if not thousands, of changes that have occurred within a file system and simply move us backwards in time. So should a system become encrypted with ransomware, and it's relatively small, under a terabyte, or Windows happens to be broken, we can certainly fail over, but sometimes it makes a heck of a lot more sense just to boot your system into our recovery environment, which looks like this. It always checks for updates in our complete restore process. Select Rapid Rollback, log into the Cirrus, select the machine that was affected, the point in time that we've already identified as healthy. I like that we can select individual volumes because if Windows is broken, I can just select the C drive. Why would I restore the entire system if Windows is broken? When I can select the relatively small C drive and just turn it backwards in time. Those restore operations literally hover around the time that it took me to run the comparison here. And just for reference, you can get a sense of how many changes had occurred within this file system if everyone can see me scrolling here and how long it took me to assess those changes. Anything that were deleted is in red. Anything that were added is in green. Anything that were modified would be showing up here in yellow. So maybe I'm looking for an earlier version of a file before it were changed, or maybe a drive filled up and I'm assessing where growth had come from. Or perhaps I'm looking for something that were deleted. I can use Control F here and find what I'm looking for, and then simply click and download the data. This is the speed and ease of use of recovery with our solution. Okay, one more thing of note here, something Don had made mention of earlier. We do come with a granular recovery tool for Microsoft Exchange, SharePoint, and SQL. For those of you that happen to be running your own in-house Exchange server, we can recover an individual mail message from any backup that had been recorded, anything from a local SharePoint site, or an individual table from the backup of a SQL database. With a third-party tool called Crawl On Track Power Controls. We have detailed knowledge base articles for those that might want to see the operation here. It's actually a relatively simple mounting of the image. Put it into this program along with your live database. eDiscovery allows us to find what we're looking for. Click and download, click and copy. Very, very simple processes. Now, for those of you that have migrated to Microsoft 365 or Google for your mail, calendar, contacts, OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, all of that great stuff, this software isn't going to do as much in the way of helping you there. However, we do have a product that will protect that information from cloud to cloud. That's called Datto SIRIS protection. Very important, very different type of solution there. Okay, last but not least, we're going to get into the true recovery scenarios, my favorite thing to show off, and what would literally happen if your server were down. Backups would start failing, perhaps prompting some proactive action from Verteks. Or of course, if you were to reach out to them and say, hey, my server's dead, help get me back up and running. This is literally how long that process would take. We remote into the Cirrus interface, select the system that had failed. Mind you, we're working on the same one that we've been doing all of our restore from, the one that I had deleted those incremental backups from earlier. We can start a copy of your production machine in 3 different locations for local failover. I can build it on the Cirrus itself using its internal CPU and RAM. If I happen to run out of system resources, I can start systems in our data center and tie them back from our recovery launchpad here back to your network. So we can virtualize in the cloud for local failover and tie it back to the Cirrus for networking purposes, or of course, network that to wherever we need to for a real disaster. And last but not least, for those of you running virtual infrastructure like VMware or Hyper-V, Cirrus can integrate with your host server infrastructure. It is very simple for this system to establish a connection to Hyper-V host and VMware host. Cirrus can act as temporary storage for the environment. We can become the SAN, essentially, and I can use the CPU and RAM of any licensed VMware host, we're talking 5.5 through 7.0, and Hyper-V 2012, R2, and up in those operating systems. So people always ask us, how do these systems perform? Typically as well as your servers perform in today's fashion. This is what it looks like to start a copy of a production server on Cirrus. I take the CPU and RAM, dedicate it here, and then we have some networking options. I can start the system disconnected for the network completely, troubleshooting bootability. I can put it on its own private subnet behind a firewall. I love noting this for those of you that still have physical servers out there. This environment means that really nothing's saved unless I want it saved. Imagine the latest rounds of Windows updates have been installed on your server, but they didn't reboot just yet. The next day, as we're monitoring screenshot verification, we noticed that Windows has failed to start across all of your systems. Everything broke. What does that mean? It means don't restart your servers. That's what it means. Roll back those updates and perhaps boot those systems here into the sandbox environment where we can test updates. If they blue screen your servers here, they will blue screen your servers in reality. So we can use this solution not only to eliminate downtime should disaster occur, we can use this solution to prevent it from happening in the first place in a lot of different cases. Should failure occur, this is the main benefit of our technology. The time that it takes to do this is just absolutely astounding, especially granted that it used to take about 24 hours for 200 gig of data. It takes about 6 seconds today. We log in, take care of some networking, just reassign an IP address. This becomes your server. You can picture that the backups that were running on your original production machine start running here. And there's no limitation in time for how long you can run and work off of this solution. This becomes your server. Everything connects here on your network. That transition is seamless to the users. They have no idea. And eventually I can take all of the data that had been changed here and bring it out of the platform back into physical or virtual systems with minimal downtime. You're talking about eliminating downtime in the original event to within a matter of seconds and minutes of that happening. Let's start another one here. Let's say that system were impacted by ransomware and we wanted to boot it right back to VMware before encryption had occurred. Now, just because we're not encrypted doesn't mean that we're healthy. So when we are in ransom scenarios, what we tend to do is boot into non-networked environments or behind that firewall on the internet like I had shown you, so segmented from the network but still online. We can update virus definitions and clean out the image, take our backup, make sure it's not sitting there like a time bomb waiting to go off again, and then start the copy of the production machine. I wanted to give everyone a sense of what it looks like to virtualize back to VMware. That we're going to create a network data store here. Done, new virtual machine created from a backup back to production. I mean, that is just absolutely incredible. And again, we have processes which allow us to take all of the data that we're changing here and bringing it into a new physical or virtual system. That's Datto continuity, folks. That's Cirrus in action. Last but not least, one of my favorite discussions to have, just given my tenure at this company. Again, I started working here when we were 150 employees. It was about 30. I was older than our CEO, who was about 28 at the time. And they used to make fun of me for being one of the older guys at Datto. I was like, guys, I'm 30. I'm not that old. Geez. I was so close to working tech support for this company. I'm pretty glad that I didn't, because the the efforts there were just incredible. People staying overnight, and I probably would have lost my mind in the stress of the scenario. But I've been lucky enough to present the solution on the behalf of our partners, and I'll tell you, we're second to none when it comes to disaster recovery. Not only do we have this capability of virtualizing systems should something horrible happen to your internal infrastructure, that could be total loss, extended power outage. We're very familiar with hurricane scenarios up here in the Northeast, as well as you guys down in Florida. But no matter what happens, rest assured that we can not only get you up and running in a timely fashion, this can all be tested well before disaster strikes. And it should be tested. This can be done as often as quarterly with Verteks and Datto support. And it's not testing for verification. It's testing to build the plan. We have to document and understand the order to bring up your systems. What resources are going to be dedicated per device? And by the way, where I'm dedicating 8 CPU cores and 16 gigs of RAM, if any of your systems needed more CPU or RAM than this, yeah, we can do that. This is simply what we can do on our own here in this interface. Networking, we want to understand, hey, does everything live on the same simple network, or do we need to start matching your infrastructure? And then last but not least, the big question everyone always wants to know, how do we get connected here in the event of a disaster? Well, the good news is you need power and internet from another location, and we will literally take care of everything else. But there's a lot of different options. We can back up workstations, connect right to a workstation. We can back up a terminal server, remote desktop server, have you connecting in the way that you would typically remote into work. We can provide open VPN software that would sit on a laptop, perhaps that you're working from home, and connect to your network in our cloud. Or last but not least, we can establish a site-to-site IPsec tunnel to another physical location that has a router or firewall capable of connecting IKV1 or IKV2 from our cloud to that network. And mind you, this is something that we've gotten right for a decade. 150 kids essentially passed the test asked of us in cloud virtualization for well over 300 different companies during Superstorm Sandy. And in the time that we're talking here, if you recall earlier, I said you'll have access to our network in less than 24 hours. I just created 4 virtual machines in Datto Cloud, and I'm turning them all on right now. There's something else incredible to note about disaster recovery here. If you've only taken your backups and you send them to another location, beyond a certain threshold of data, if you have a disaster, you could still be in a heck of a lot of trouble. Consider this. The time that it would take for you to get your data back from that cloud storage, whether you're downloading it or having it put on media and sent back to you, once you get it back, you have to initialize recovery processes that can take hours or days or weeks worth of time. A lot of people don't understand that fact, that they think that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, and lo and behold, that if a disaster strikes, you can still go out of business. Here you're working in less than 24 hours in our data center. Should that original device be compromised, say Cirrus were destroyed, we're going to build you another one. We're going to work with your insurance company, replace the unit, and I'm not going to send you an empty Cirrus. Imagine that all of your cloud data is loaded onto a new appliance while you're up and running in our data center. Then we overnight a new solution to you. You turn off in our cloud, download just 24 hours worth of block level changes that have occurred as your new system had shipped to you. It's time to turn off in Pennsylvania. Who the heck wants to work in Pennsylvania through a VPN tunnel? Turn off your environment in our cloud, and then begin running the environment from the solution once again. That's why I went into such great detail when I was talking about local failover. You run from here, we don't care about how long you run from the appliance, and then you fully restore your environment from the local solution. So what does that translate to? It means that you never have to fully restore your entire environment from our data center. That would take forever. And really with that, Don, I'm gonna stop at this point. We'll give everyone a chance to ask some questions, and I just wanted to thank you, because it's really always such a pleasure to present on behalf of our partners.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Appreciate all that. I do want to offer one more thing. You were talking about kind of the planning process and the testing process and how critical that is. And, hearkening back to something you said earlier, that backup is really only a third of what we're doing here. We're also doing local high availability, business continuity, and disaster recovery as well with Cirrus. But something I wanted to highlight about what makes our service different and what makes Verteks different is during installation, our Datto certified and trained engineers that work for us are going to create a business continuity plan for you, a document that shows all of your server infrastructure, all your dependencies, a server boot priority order, and all those resource requirements. And that's a living document that we'll maintain and you'll always have access to. So a big value for you when you move into the Datto environment is we are documenting exactly how you bring your system back online in the event of a disaster. And it might sound like something like, yeah, hey, turn everything on, but it's not that easy, especially if you've got 15, 20, or 40 servers and you've got SQL, you've got maybe Exchange on site, or maybe you've got other critical applications. There are underlying dependencies. We got to bring a DC up first. We got to bring a DNS server up. And sometimes these have to be done in a very specific order. And we also want to make sure that we're doing that in a way that if there is a disaster or a major crisis, that you go to a playbook and you can kind of execute that play rapidly. Then we test that plan. So part of our service, again, is we create the business continuity disaster recovery plan for you. We keep it updated. We test it, and we show it to you, and you've always got access to it. So you can then go to your team, your bosses or your key stakeholders and show them, hey, we've got a hard copy business continuity and disaster recovery plan that lists our specific servers, what the boot order is, how they bring them up. We've tested it, we verified it, and then it's working. And so huge peace of mind and a lot of comfort comes with having that. And frankly, without a Datto, I don't know that you could do it.
Right.
Because testing
What a great point you made there.
Yeah.
And while we have all of this advanced verification, and it should give us the peace of mind, it's not the end all be all. You bring up an excellent point that we still have to plan. We still need to create process. The good news is that we shouldn't be testing for verification as such, right? We should have some assurance there, but we still need to test. Your backups are literally only as good as this process, and Verteks does it better than anyone in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that. Let me and that is something that really is a very high bar and puts you way ahead of the pack, because as we all know, what we're trying to do here is hope for the best but plan for the worst. And I hope you never need to use a business continuity plan. I hope you never need to use a true disaster recovery guide. I hope you never need to virtualize it all in the cloud. But if that happens, if the worst does happen, we want you to be able to proceed rapidly to restoring your environment, minimize downtime, minimize the impact on your clients, your customers, your business, and have the peace of mind that goes with knowing you've got a service that's operational, it's working, it's well maintained, and we're taking proactive care. So that's really all the stuff that we have to offer. Anything in closing on your side, Dan?
I guess the number one thing to note here is that you have Verteks and Datto behind you in process. We're here making the solution better every day. We hear a lot about our system, and we are not stagnant in the way that it's been developed. It's changed dramatically over the years, and it will continue to do so. It has to evolve. So as these threats change and the landscapes change, and we're simply here with one focus in mind. What do we need to do to keep you up and running in as time effective a manner as possible? And again, in all my tenure in IT, I can't tell you how badly I stayed away from backup technology. It really just scared the life out of me. This solution gives me confidence, and I think that it will speak for itself if you ever need to recover anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say in closing, to summarize it all, is that your data and your IT systems are the lifeblood of any modern business. And Verteks and Datto, we protect it. That's what we do. So Appreciate your time today, everybody. We will post this recording later on our YouTube channel so it can be viewed on demand. I'll also make a copy of the introductory slides available to everybody in attendance. We will send out a survey post-webinar to get your input on future presentation topics, and also on today's webinar. I'd love your feedback. We'll make ourselves available to answer any additional questions that come up. And we thank you for attending today, and we appreciate your interest, and we look forward to talking to you soon. All right, everybody, have a great day. Dan, thank you very much. Amanda, thank you. Brittany, thank you. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.